Welcome to the second volume of Hull Bygone Days. As you may have seen in our Hull at War series of videos, the city suffered terrible damage during the Blitz of World War II. Men returning from the forces came home to a city barely recognisable as the one they'd left. Many soldiers, sailors and airmen never came home, and they're remembered here at the city's War Memorial at Paragon Square. Many of the soldiers who fell, of course, would have been in the East Yorkshire Regiment. The Battle of the Somme, July 1916, when the flower of British manhood rose up out of the trenches and into the hell of no man's land. On the first day of the battle, there were 60,000 British casualties. In the thick of it all, as usual, was the East Yorkshire Regiment. Hopes had been high as they marched off the war past the original Cecil Cinema in 1914. It will all be over by Christmas, they said. But their wives and children were right to be more fearful. Actually, this film was made by Ernest Simmons after the war in 1919, with these scenes of life in the trenches shot in farmland somewhere around Beverley. The reality of life at the front had, we now know, been much worse than could be portrayed on film. But the civilian population was still being protected from the truth. Nevertheless, this short trailer still hits its mark as a fundraiser for those tens of thousands of maimed and injured servicemen who endured the horror. In World War II, the East Yorkshires fought in all theatres of war, helping to defeat Rommel in Africa, pushing the Germans back in Italy, and they were among the very first soldiers across the beaches on D-Day. The East Yorks have always recruited strongly in Hull, and on the 8th of June 1946, in recognition of their achievements, the regiment was awarded the freedom of the city. Once again, Ernest Simmons was there to record the event.
Among those invited to attend the ceremony were the mayors and civic heads of adjoining boroughs and districts. The Lord Mayor, Councillor Herbert Harrison, the Worshipful the Sheriff, Councillor H.W. Jackson and the Town Clerk arrive in procession to open the proceedings. In his speech of welcome, the Lord Mayor refers to the long and honourable association of the city with the East Yorkshire Regiment, which was formed in the year 1685 during the reign of King James II. The Town Clerk reads the formal resolution of the City Council, when it was unanimously agreed to confer the freedom of the city upon the regiment, and also to maintain the colours of the regiment in perpetuity. This resolution had been passed some 2 years previously under the Lord Mayoralty of Alderman Fryer, but the stress of war years had made it impossible for the actual presentation to be made earlier. Immediately in front of the dais, the historic colours of the regiment are paraded, and on these are emblazoned the 10 battle honours, out of the many which this famous regiment has earned during its long and glorious history. The Lord Mayor makes the formal presentation of the casket containing the scroll to Lieutenant General Sir Desmond Anderson, the Colonel of the regiment. In his reply, General Sir Desmond Anderson thanks the Lord Mayor and the citizens of Kingston upon Hull for the honour conferred upon the regiment, and refers to the enormous damage caused to the city by enemy bombing, and praises the spirit, determination and courage of the citizens with which they passed through the great ordeal of those dark days. This city too was in the front line, and although buildings have been ruined and many lives unhappily lost, the city was already showing that it had the same qualities of determination and courage in planning and rebuilding of this great city, the third port of the United Kingdom. A detachment from the regiment forms the Guard of Honour. And as the colours are raised, the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff, preceded by the adjutant of the regiment, and accompanied by Lieutenant General Sir Desmond Anderson and several past colonels of the regiment, both regular and territorial, inspect the Guard of Honour and several units of cadet forces affiliated to the regiment. Many of these are sons and grandsons of those who served the regiment with distinction and courage in the past. Up to the end of the First Great War, members of this regiment had earned 4 Victoria Crosses, and during the last war, another name, that of Private Eric Anderson, had been added to this roll of fame. The foundations of a modern regiment are laid in the cadet forces, which are associated with and affiliated to the regiment, which seeks to inspire and encourage the team spirit so essential in a regiment with such a proud and long tradition as that of the East Yorkshires. Hence today they have a special place in the parade, and their bearing during the inspection is one of which they may be justly proud. On parade also are the dumb friends of man, the dogs lent by citizens of Hull for war work. After the presentation and the inspection, the civic party made their way to the saluting base on the steps of the Ferry's Art Gallery. Here they are to watch the march past and the taking of the salute. Let us join the civic party and watch the regiment, the cadet forces, the old Comrades Association, the British Legion, the old Contemptibles pass in proud array past the saluting base. It is a thrilling sight as we watch the regiment, led by its band, with colours flying and bayonets fixed, march past, and the citizens of Hull assemble in great numbers, not merely to watch the proceedings, but to show by their cheering and applause that they too appreciate the honour which has been done to a regiment so closely associated with the city, and in which their husbands and sons have proudly served. streets are lined with enthusiastic crowds, and the regiment marches through bomb-shattered streets, past the open spaces which once housed thriving business or commercial firms, and as the marching feet pass on their way, adding another episode to the long and honourable career of this regiment, we hear in imagination the steps of those who might have been with them, who were once proud members of this famous regiment, and how certain we may be that their hearts would be in tune as their feet would be in step. But not for them the visual glory of this outstanding day. They have fought, suffered and died in the service of their country, that we and succeeding generations might live in that freedom which they loved so much that they were ready to give even their lives that it might be preserved.
The men of the East Yorkshire Regiment had every right to be proud of their achievement as they marched through the city in 1946. Perhaps as youngsters in the city of 1929, they may have seen a parade of quite a different kind, passing in front of what is now a nightclub, but what was then the Grand Theatre in George Street. It's 1929 and Hull's city history passes in pageant. Bearded ancient Britons begin the chronological lineup, and a Roman chariot, escorted by possibly a cohort of the 9th. These are the Saxon monks of Myton. The crowned young man on a horse is King Edward I, so the following monks must be of Muse. So the theme is now medieval, and Trinity Choir has not changed. The brass band's a bit anachronistic, as it heralds Henry VIII's carriage, presumably a 6-seater. The guillotine is Hull's, from Hull, Elland and Halifax, O Lord, deliver us. Hull's revolution, the Civil War, Charles and Hotham in the saddle, and the new model army is followed by Wilberforce. This medieval team must have arrived too late for the head of the pageant. What looks like the Sea Cadets now, blowing their bugles with clean knees. Here are Girl Guides and Scouts, straight out of the pages of Winifred Holtby's South Riding, as are the schoolgirls of Hull High School and Alderman Cogan's, and they are followed closely by Hymer's boys in their cricket whites. These are the scenes at Paragon Station on the 9th of June 1995, when His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales visited the city in support of business in the community and his organisation, the Prince's Trust. It was a busy day with appointments at Victoria Dock, Gypsyville, the Ice Arena and Withensea. But there are those in Hull who remember well the visit of his father, the Duke of Edinburgh, on the 1st of December 1948, just days after Prince Charles was born. It was a bleak wintry morning as the royal train pulled into a misty Paragon Station, guided by driver Fred Crossley of Hessle High Road and fireman George Harrison of Oldstead Avenue. After greeting local dignitaries, the Duke, in naval uniform, stood to attention outside the Royal Station Hotel as the band of the 4th East Yorkshire Regiment played the Royal Salute. These pictures come courtesy of the Hull Corporation Parks Department and a host of professional and amateur cameramen, including Bill Jackets, whose work for the police force can be seen on our City Beat video. After a brief inspection, the Duke moved on to the factory of Ideal boilers and radiators in National Avenue, where a crowd of 1,000 enthusiastic onlookers watched as the Duke of Edinburgh was presented to Managing Director Mr. Down and 5 other employees, including Mr. D.K. Dick, an iron moulder who represented the foundry workers. As the Duke left the radiator department, a very nervous employee, Miss Lillian Heppel, asked, "How is the Princess and the baby?" "Extremely well, thank you," he replied. The Duke then took a quick look at products from the pottery department before proceeding by car to Smith & Nephew Limited on Neptune Street, where the Lord Mayor, Alderman T.R. Broadbent, presented 6 staff before the Duke was led on a tour of the factory, closely watched by the excited employees. Princess Dock was the next stop, and an inspection of Hull's latest addition to her trawler fleet, the Princess Elizabeth. Clearly at home, the sailor Duke strode the decks vigorously and expressed great interest in all the details of the vessel's fitting out for sea trials. As the Duke left, the cameraman caught a glimpse of a Princess Dock we'll never see again. The Duke's next appointment was a hurriedly scheduled visit to the British cocoa mills in Tower Street, where a tragic explosion had occurred 2 days earlier, resulting in severe loss of life. Hull folk were used to scenes like this. After all, it was only 7 years after the King and Queen had toured Hull's blitzed streets in 1941. At the height of the blaze, there had been 20 fire tenders fighting to control the fire. 2 3/4 miles of hose was deployed, and during the firefighting activities, 1,200 cups of tea had been served. After lunch at the Guildhall, the Duke and civic party walked to the now demolished Queen's Hall to be greeted by 1,700 children from Hull schools and colleges. The majority sang their hearts out, while a few were just overawed. Finally came the principal event of the day, the reopening of the City Hall, rebuilt from a shell, all that was left after the Luftwaffe's attention. Once inside, the Duke of Edinburgh greeted corporation officials and workmen before performing the official opening ceremony. Then, responding to the wishes of the people, the Duke strode out onto the balcony to show his appreciation to the thousands of cheering spectators gathered in Victoria Square. For them, it was a day they will never forget. docklands have long been the commercial foundation of the city. When they were busy, then the people of Hull prospered. When they were slack, times were hard for many. International competition for business is always fierce. Today, Hull's docklands are enjoying a boom period. But that wasn't the case in the 70s or in the early 1980s. Then there were real problems, but more about that at a later date, perhaps. In 1968, the British Transport Film Unit came to Hull, and any rumblings of discontent amongst the men were swept under the carpet. The message of the film was upbeat. Hull docklands were thriving.
It is tide time. The early morning mists have yet to clear. The ships have made the 22-mile passage from the sea up the river Humber. The ocean carriers, attended by their tugs, maneuver towards the dock gates. Two trawlers home from Bear Island wait in midstream for their turn to enter the fish docks. The Bolton Abbey is already securing at Riverside Quay. The quay is in the river outside the docks, and so ships can berth at any state of the tide. In the locks of the King George dock is the Scottish trader. A week ago, she was sailing through the warmth of the Gulf of Mexico, outward bound from New Orleans. In her vast holds, she carries 16,000 tons of grain. Big, but not the biggest of such cargoes. Nearly 7,000 vessels a year breast the wide Humber estuary for the port of Hull. 7,000 vessels sailing to and from every principal port of the world, carrying a tremendous range of commodities inwards and outwards through the docks. Much of the recent success of the port is due to the large-scale improvements over the past 5 years, involving a variety of major engineering projects. Today, the port covers 7 miles of riverbank, from St Andrew's fish docks in the west to the oil installations at Salt End in the east. 11 docks in all, 2,000 acres in extent, 200 acres of locked water, 12 miles of dock quays, 2 tidal riverside quays, 3 deep water jetties. In the lock of the fish dock, the Stella Leonis is back after 3 weeks at sea. The crew are ready for their 2 days ashore. Their hard, cold work is finished, and the bobbers will take over the unloading of the fish. Hull is the premier fishing port of Britain. 150 large deep-water trawlers fitted with every navigational and fishing aid are based here. In a year, they land up to 250,000 tons of fish, a quarter of Britain's total supplies. The laden trawlers lie alongside the fish markets, where early in the morning the fish is landed and auctioned, before most people have had their breakfast, quickly followed by cleaning, filleting, packing, and dispatch by road or rail. Once the trawlers are unloaded, they move over to the south side of the dock. Here the engineers, the radar experts, the radio men take over. In a couple of days, the ships must be restocked, overhauled, and made ready. The very latest trawlers, over 1,000 gross tons, are stern fishers, equipped to freeze the whole or part of their catches at sea. The Albert and William Wright docks and Riverside Quay are the most important of the commercial docks to the west of the River Hull. With about 30 acres of water space, they provide berths for vessels sailing between Hull and such places as Malmo, Bremen, Hamburg, Antwerp, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Oslo, and ports in South Norway and Portugal. The Deblin is one of the vessels which sail weekly to and from Gdynia. The Texelstrom to and from Amsterdam. Except for her new type deck cranes, she's typical of the ships using these docks. At Hull, she loads machinery, cars, tractors, and textiles. At Amsterdam, butter, bacon, and foods in variety. To conserve quay space, the cranes are of the semi-portal type. The sheds at Riverside Quay and Albert Dock have been constructed with barrel vault concrete roofs and without interior pillars to give free movement to mechanical handling appliances. fast, efficient cranes, doorways wide and high, excellent roof lighting, ample floor space, easy access by road and rail, all add up to faster, safer, and of course better handling of cargoes. To provide first-class facilities for passengers using these and adjacent berths, an attractive passenger terminal was included in the riverside development. The Victoria Dock is the hub of the sawnwood importing trade. Nearly all the timber here is from Scandinavia. There's a large trade in pit props for the coal mines in the Midlands and the north of England. And the docks handle well over 100,000 tons a year. This is part of the sawnwood storage area. In all, Hull has about 1 million square yards available for stacking timber. East again from the Victoria Dock is the 53-acre Alexandra Dock, the home of many important shipping services. Working at full stretch and down for major development, this dock gives yeoman service to the port. Most of the berths here are equipped with sheds and crane power, but some are specifically provided to give overside discharging facilities to barges. Hull is the terminus of an extensive system of canals and inland waterways. The southeast side of the dock has 3 jetties, which divide this section into 4 bays, each capable of berthing 2 vessels of up to 420 feet. Nowadays, the Alexandra Dock not only deals with ocean-going ships, but regularly berths vessels in the near-continental fruit, vegetable and provision trades, as well as handling Scandinavian timber, paper and wood pulp. It also provides terminal facilities for regular shipping services to and from Sweden, Norway, Finland, the Mediterranean and Adriatic ports. One of the services the port supplies is about 7,000 rail vehicles for timber in transit from ship to local storage yards. At Saltend, at the eastern extremity of the port, are specialized berths for the discharging or loading of bulk liquid cargoes. The shore installations are sited on part of the 1,000-acre estate, which is available for industrial development. Built at a cost of £1.3 million, a new 1,600-foot concrete jetty with 2 berthing heads sweeps out into the River Humber. Just as a start, 1 million tons of silt, sand, peat and clay were dredged from the river. The pile driving was a feat in itself. In some places, piles of 130 feet in length had to be driven. Despite the difficulties encountered, the work progressed rapidly, and by 1961, the number 3 T-head was in use, followed by the new number 1 at the beginning of 1963. The new jetties were built to take tankers of up to 28,000 deadweight tons and to carry a total of 57 oil, chemical and service pipes to the oil and chemical installations ashore. Into Saltend come aldehydes, alcohols, molasses and liquid chemicals, as well as petroleum. And from it are shipped petroleum and chemical products. The tank farms at Saltend have a capacity well in excess of 150 million gallons. And new tanks are being added to handle the rapidly expanding trade. Alongside the petroleum depots are distillers' large laboratories and chemical processing plant. The jetty heads are equipped with the latest appliances for the handling of flexible hose to link the pipeline headers with the ship. Today, petroleum imports are higher than ever before. During the last 5 years, they have risen by 30% to 2.5 million tons. Presenting the very latest in accommodation for ships and cargoes is the King George Dock, the fruits of progressive investment running into millions of pounds. Here are to be seen the flags of all nations. This is the largest of the 11 docks and comprises an estate of 300 acres of land and 55 acres of water. Here, impounding pumps have been installed which maintained the water at the level of high water spring tides, enabling vessels of up to 25,000 deadweight tons to be berthed. The King George dock contains 2 of Hull's 5 dry docks, each equipped for underwater voyage repairs or longer-term overhauls. This is the main grain dock. 1 million tons of grain in bulk are imported into Hull annually, and one of the city's principal industries is flour milling and the manufacture of grain products. Part of the reconstruction work included the building of an extension to the grain silo, which increased its capacity by 50%. The silo now consists of 2 buildings, 100 feet high, with a total of 432 reinforced concrete bins, each holding 140 tons, giving a total capacity of 60,000 tons of grain. Hull is a well-established loading point for cars, tractors and vehicle parts, and the tonnage handled has increased every year for the past 10 years. The plans took this into account, and parks were built to store vehicles waiting shipment. The first of the 6 new sheds to be brought into use were the 2 on number 12 quay, and from above something can be seen of the wide quays which make for speedier working. Before the £4.75 million programme was begun, development at King George Dock had included the installation of 45 new cranes of 70-foot radius and 6 tons lifting capacity, giving twice the speed of the replaced equipment, and the rebuilding or resurfacing of all the principal quays. The merit of these new berths has been very clearly demonstrated by the fact that an improvement of 25% has been achieved in the turnaround of vessels. 100,000 tons of vehicles are shipped from Hull in a year, and this is part of a cargo for Vancouver. Wool is a very valuable import traffic at Hull, which at present deals with 1/3 of the total United Kingdom imports. The sorting of the wool into the various grades required by the Yorkshire woolen industry demands considerable knowledge and skill, which has become traditional among the men of Hull. The Dock Authority have specialised staff at King George Dock for handling wool in accordance with the varying needs of ships' agents, importing agents, receivers and hauliers. One of the most satisfying aspects of the modernisation of Hull is that the results are really justifying the work and expenditure involved. An example of this was the Scottish trader which brought grain from New Orleans. She was unloaded by 4 land-based and 3 floating suction elevators, which broke the port record by discharging 6,000 tons of grain in a day. These developments so far are but forerunners of others in the planning stage. With its continually improving facilities, with its expertise, with its capacity for quick working, Britain's third port looks confidently to the future.
It's self-evident to say that crucial to the success of Hull's docklands was the rail network that serviced them, carrying timber, pit props and other raw materials imported from Scandinavia, Europe and the Commonwealth, and then distributing finished products for export worldwide. Sadly, much of the rail network has disappeared. Things are not what they used to be. However, for some, the idea of recreating, of reliving the golden age of steam is not just a dream.
In 1969, scrap merchant Albert Draper decided to preserve a steam locomotive in working order, after having broken up several hundred at his yard in Neptune Street, which was formerly a goods yard of the Hull and Barnsley Railway. The engine selected was BR 45305, which was built in 1936 by Armstrong Whitworth, one of the favourite Black 5 of the old LMS company, starting work as number 5305 at Carnforth Shed. Mr. Draper called in the services of a group of enthusiasts who had been recording the demise of locomotives at his yard, and the work of restoration soon became a work of dedication for Ian Scotney, Brian Egan and Tom Tye. This is how the engine looked in 1973, and the serious setback was when the boiler tubes were found to be badly corroded, with complete replacement being the only option. At At this early stage, there was no lack of pessimists who swore the engine would never steam again, and while it stood idle and unprotected in the yard, rust was a serious problem. One of the many heavy tasks was the dismantling of the pistons and cylinders, and this called for some really hard work. The steam locomotive is a heavy and powerful machine, and the working parts are built to stand up to the work expected of them. But neither pessimists nor hard work deterred the enthusiasts, who had now increased in number. Hopes were high for more rapid progress in the restoration, when the engine was hauled from Neptune Street at a very slow pace by a diesel shunting engine, past the Albert Docks cabin and Dairycoat's West signal box, before being reversed into its new home in a Dairycoat shed. April 1976, and at long last, after many delays and frustrations, the day arrived when the new boiler tubes were delivered. Work had been almost at a standstill, waiting for their arrival, but now, with a renewed enthusiasm, the work of fitting and measuring the tubes went forward with gusto. As this work went on, other less exciting chores were not forgotten. May 1976. The tubes had been accurately cut to size, and it was now the turn of engineer Mr. Houghton to start work with the tube expanders to secure the tubes with a steam-tight joint. Here he is working inside the firebox, which gives some indication of its size. Mr. Houghton's partner assisted at the front of the engine inside the smoke box, while other enthusiasts continued with the lesser but still necessary duties. A hydraulic test on the engine had proved successful, and so on the 11th of June 1976, the long-awaited day arrived, when 5305 could be hauled out of the shed for a trial under steam. And here it is on the 12th of June, and really in steam for the first time since being withdrawn from regular service by British Rail. Pete Turner stoked up, while Ronnie Turner was at the regulator. But there was still some work to do, the most obvious being boiler cladding. With boiler cladding in place, the engine looked a more familiar sight, and was soon out again for another steam test, with a slightly longer track to run on. Members of the restoration group were highly delighted with the performance and appearance of the engine, which looked very smart in its black and gold livery, with red lining executed by Martin Barker. With the restoration now complete, an open day was held to celebrate, and the pessimists, who swore the engine would never steam again, were happy to have been proved wrong.
Since the beginning of time, the River Humber has been a very physical barrier between Lincolnshire yellowbellies and Yorkshire tykes. Contact between the two communities was always difficult. Those who made the effort in modern times did so on one of the beloved paddle steamers that once plied the shallow waters between Hull and the south bank. With the building of the Humber Bridge, the ferries became redundant. One of the last remaining is the Lincoln Castle, now an exhibit, at peace so to speak, at the National Fishing Heritage Centre in Grimsby. Let's look back at life, BB, before the bridge.
By the late 1920s, growth in car ownership spelled the end for the ageing passenger ferries of Brocklesby and Cleethorpes. However, no new vessels were added until 1934. By that time, the demand was for a quick, efficient car ferry service across the Humber, with provision for a drive-on, drive-off embarkation facility capable of carrying 20 cars and 500 passengers between New Holland and Hull. First of the new paddle steamers were the Tattersall Castle and the Wingfield Castle, built by William Gray and Company of West Hartlepool. They provided greater comfort for the passengers and more room for goods as well as cars. Both ships had refreshment buffets with separate lounges for first and second class passengers. Their names were chosen to honour both north and south shores of the Humber. Tattersall Castle on the Lincolnshire bank and Wingfield Castle for the Hull side, named after the ancestral home of the old Hull family of de la Pole. With the arrival of these two new boats, the existing paddle steamers were sold. Brocklesby in 1935 and Cleethorpes in 1936, and eventually both were resold for scrap. One of the old paddle steamers, the Killinghome, remained as a relief boat and for excursions, a popular one being a cruise around the Spurn Peninsula to Withensea and back. In 1972, British Rail, by now responsible for the ferry service, began replacing the now ageing castles with paddle ferries brought up from their Isle of Wight service. Tattersall Castle was the first to be sold. It became a floating art gallery on the Thames. Then, in 1974, the Wingfield Castle was replaced by the Farringford, a diesel-electric paddle boat built to carry 35 cars and 500 passengers. With the building of the Humber Bridge, the days of the ferry service were numbered, and the Lincoln Castle made her final journey on March 17, 1978. The Farringford ended her service on June 24, 1981. Then the Humber ferries had gone forever.
The ferries docked here at Minerva Pier, at one time a two-storey pier and promenade, but now significantly altered for safety reasons. Now the Humber ferry service was efficient, regular, and it was a pleasant trip. The 19th century station, where passengers bought their tickets, was built just over 100 years before the bridge was opened, and it stands behind me still. However, in 1934, the ticket office and the seagoing paddlers were seriously threatened by the wheels of technological advance.
The rival enterprise started with Grimsby man Frank Hawkin scouring Dixon's rubbish tip for odds and ends. His workmates were let in on the secret. Well, they thought he was a bit cuckoo, but decided to lend a hand. When the vessel was finished, the strange-looking craft was called Cuckoo. It was such a well-kept secret that Mrs. Hawkin knew nothing about the venture. The sea trials were held at the docks, where the intrepid inventor was watched by a crowd of anxious friends. Then there was a solemn naming ceremony. Serious business. To everyone's surprise, except Frank's of course, the bicycle floated like a dream, or at any rate it stayed on top better than its sister vessel, though it wasn't clear whether the other boat was actually trying to submerge, intending to cross the Humber underwater, or whether it had a basic design flaw. All was ready for the big day on Saturday, September 15th, 1934, when the ace inventor and his pals packed Cuckoo into a launch and set off for Spurn Head. After fishing for a couple of hours, waiting for the tide, Frank was on his way. Arthur Spencer was aboard to film the historical event. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hawkin was visiting her parents, unaware of all this mischief Frank was getting himself into. There was a slight storm, but Frank's pals cheered him through it. Minor repairs had to be carried out with the aid of a mallet mid-river, as Frank paddled, but there was also plenty of drink to fortify him on his way. The journey took 3 hours and 10 minutes. Sadly, it was too dark to film his triumphant arrival in Cleethorpes. Well, history does have a habit of repeating itself, and 61 years later, here is Grimsby man Ken Coolbeck Jr. scouring the same Dixon's rubbish tip for odds and ends to build a replica of Frank's seagoing bike. This time the National Fishing Heritage Centre is in on the act, helping to build a craft with which to attempt to break Frank's time of 3 hours 10 minutes. The first serious trials were ably assisted, if that's the right word, by Grimsby's Member of Parliament, Austin Mitchell.
The saddle needs tightening, Austin, really. You'll fall off it.
The saddle needs adjustment, I think.
Yes, it does, else you'll come off.
Whoa! It's cold on the back! After modifications to the rear of the bike, it was then taken to Cleethorpes Baths. Here, triathlon competitor and distant relative of Frank Hawkin, Andy Clucas, put himself and the bike to the test against the wave machine. All was looking good until suddenly the chain came off. Despite this setback, Andy expressed confidence in the bike. Everyone agreed he was the man for the job. Meanwhile, Ken Coolbeck was off to see expert bike man Brian Nicholson to discuss solutions to the problem.
You know, we went NGC with that, and you bet it out because it was NGC. That's more clearance there.
I see.
But it's slow.
I see.
That'll lower your gear a bit.
Yes.
Ken and the National Fishing Heritage Centre team, under the direction of Richard Doughty, worked tirelessly to perfect the craft. And on the 1st of September 1995, the magnificent vessel, a shining testimony to British engineering expertise, was formally named Cuckoo 2.
Hopefully the bottle of Grimsby cod liver oil will break and we shall then officially launch, and God bless Cuckoo and all who sail in her. How's that?
Hooray!
And because the captain hasn't turned up, they've asked Alec Bogle if he'll pedal it round. How's that?
And so to the day of the crossing attempt, the 16th of September, Spurn Point. The attempt was being filmed for the Record Breakers TV programme, and presenter Mark Curry was keen to hear how Andy fancied his chances. Richard Doughty was more than a little concerned about the weather conditions.
Well, they're not ideal by any means. We're going to get the boat into position, and it's going to be up to Andy now to assess what the conditions are like when he's actually in the water. We'll take a final decision then. So it's still a very nail-biting moment. But beside all that, you know, this is, I don't know, it's historical make-believe. It's an opportunity for us to celebrate an eccentric, to celebrate Frank Hawkins, to celebrate something I think that's uniquely British, this eccentricity, this whole notion of trying to pit a man's strength against the elements. So we're going to have to wait and see what Andy says when he's out there in a few minutes' time.
With conditions still far from ideal, Cuckoo 2 was pedalled into position by Bill Dodgson, and Andy decided it was now or never.
It's blustering 3 to 4 northerly. The wind direction's good. The wind speed is probably a touch heavier than I would have liked it.
Yeah.
But we'll see how it goes.
The Mayor of Grimsby did the honours.
Right, give him the countdown, Mr. Mayor.
3, 2, 1, start!
The cameras turned. The support vessel stood by and the race was on. Could Andy Clucas break Frank Hawkins' record of 3 hours 10 minutes? Alas, sadly not. Within 2 hours, a crippled Cuckoo 2 was taken in tow by the lifeboat. She had been within sight of Cleethorpes when Andy, struggling with a chain that just wouldn't stay on, finally bowed to the inevitable, and Cuckoo 2 was pushed ashore at Cleethorpes, much to the dismay of the expectant crowd.
Here it is. He made it with the vehicle didn't. Tell him what the problem was. Flat tyre. Has anybody got a puncture repair kit? Fantastic. Fantastic. Has anybody got a clean pair of jeans for me, please? Nice and dry. Thank you. Come on, let's get on some dry land. There's a hole, is there?
Thank you, yes.
So where were you, Mr. Mayor? You should have been out there with us.
Yeah.
3 hours, 1 minute.
3 on it. And I wasn't on it. Yeah. That's 2 miles. That's the colour. Just one of those things. Yes, maybe.
Never mind your face. Fantastic.
For the National Fishing Heritage Centre team, the cause of failure was all too easy to see. Frank Hawkins' record of 3 hours and 10 minutes remained unbeaten. But for how long?
The ferries are long gone, but the development of the seagoing bike looks set to continue. How much has changed in the 20th century, but it is good to see that the true English eccentric is still alive and pedalling. We're going to end this edition of our Hull Bygone Days video with a look back to the 1950s, and we're going to use footage edited from our City Beat video. Now, this was an age before pedestrianisation, before double yellow lines, before parking meters and the like, an age when Rach Carter led the Tigers out against West Ham. Trawlers were towed downriver from the Beverley shipyards, an age that is now history, pure nostalgia.